Hello and welcome to Horror Cult Trash Over, the show that discusses all the masterpieces and trashpieces of genre cinema. I'm Gary.
And I'm Chris.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween!
It is October 31st and this is a bonus episode. So, when we do a bonus episode, we thought we'd pick a subject rather than a specific film. It means we've spent the last 4 weeks talking to you guys about, fantastic films and such. We thought we'd pick one of our favourite subjects, and I'm sure a lot of people would have gone for like seasonal films and such, but we've gone for the subject of Scream Queens. Not the fantastic TV show with Emma Roberts and Jamie Lee Curtis, but the subject of mainly women within horror, but women that are referred to as Scream Queens within horror, and there's so many different definitions people have of this term, so we're going to go from the 60s onwards and talk about it through the decades.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit more free-flowing than the normal podcast, so it's going to be a little less structured. We're just going to sort of discuss some of our favourite Scream Queens, what the term Scream Queens means, where the whole idea of a Scream Queen comes into horror cinema, and particularly the representation of women in horror. So it's a really broad area. We'll hopefully cover as much as possible without, going on for about 4 hours, which could easily happen.
Okay, so, we're going to start off. What we're going to do is, for each decade, we've got a specific Scream Queen that we're going to start with and focus on a little bit before moving on and, talking about connections to other Scream Queens. So, to start off with, we're going to start in the 60s. And for Scream Queens as a whole in the 60s, what would your definition be?
So, sort of coming out of the early horror films and horror film icons such as Fay Wray, in the 60s, horror took a more gothic turn. There was a lot of gothic horror films, a lot of films set in the past. Male stars such as Vincent Price were becoming quite prominent, and women sort of took a little backseat to stars such as Vincent Price in these films. And the lady we'd like to discuss is Barbara Steele, who in many ways sort of went against that grain.
She defeats the stereotype that you get in the 60s for Scream Queens. And she is, very well known as, one of the greatest British Scream Queens. Which is interesting because for me, whenever you think of Scream Queens, and especially in the 60s, I think, damsel in distress, essentially your victim, but the person you want to root for to survive.
Yeah, in films such as King Kong with Fay Wray, the girl was there to just scream.
Yeah.
And be shocked.
Yeah, and that was amongst some of the first. I think King Kong back in 1933. And that did lead on to many decades after. And you look at, people like Janet Leigh in Psycho.
Yeah, so we start the 60s with Janet Leigh.
Yeah, and then, even people such as Judith O'Dea in Night of the Living Dead. And, even to a certain extent, you've got Rosemary's Baby with
Mia Farrow.
So, you look at all these women in the 60s and they are victims within horror films and they are very much classed as Scream Queens. But then you got Barbara Steele, who's also classed as a Scream Queen, and she comes in and fucks it all up.
Yeah.
In the best way possible. We love Barbara Steele.
Yeah, she's fantastic in those Italian films that she did. She was one of the last actors to be signed to the Rank organisation, which was a studio here in Britain, and they wanted her to dye her hair blonde, and she basically said no, piss off.
Yeah.
She'd had she was cast as the female lead in a Elvis Presley film as well, The Flaming Star, if I remember correctly, and she had a big disagreement with the director and basically pissed off to Italy and did these fantastic gothic horror films. Obviously, the most famous of them being Black Sunday.
Yes.
Where she plays the antagonist.
Yeah. Yeah, and even in films like She Beast, which is a fun film, shall we say?
I'm not sure what to say about She.
Yeah. I mean, she plays the protagonist in it for the most part until I mean, spoiler alert if you're gonna watch She Beast, pause it now and skip a bit. But once she comes into contact with the She Beast eventually gives birth to her in full size Barbara Steele.
Yeah, very.
But I mean,
film.
as far as Scream Queens is concerned, that film takes it a bit literal. The She Beast itself is just screams. That's all it does.
Yeah, and I think Barbara Steele sort of what you found with a lot of the Universal horror films and the studio horror films was that you got Scream Queens who were probably typecast. They didn't necessarily choose these roles because horror films at the time were seen as B movies. These weren't your A-list actresses, your Betty Davises or your Marilyn Monroes. These were films that were made on the cheap. They did well. They had an audience. But the women in them were never really that memorable. And a lot of the actresses were typecast. And then you find somebody like Barbara Steele who fully immerses herself into horror and enjoys it and enjoys playing the witch or the bad guy and revels in it in many ways. And it's really refreshing. She's gorgeous as well, though. A real beautiful face and big. Something
that again goes against Scream Queens in the early days. That changes up once you get to the 80s.
Well, no, so she's beautiful, but probably not as conventional as they were. She's a little more sexual.
Yeah, with living and dead things.
Yeah, yeah, and she's not afraid to go full horror and go fully into it.
Yeah,
and that's why she's really a true Scream Queen. And the idea of a Scream Queen, some people think a Scream Queen is an actress that had one notable role.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's easy for people to just say, someone's a Scream Queen just because they're a female in a horror film, which is not the case. Well, it is to some people, it's in a way it's subjective.
It's the idea that it's a notable role.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily class Sissy Spacek. I'm sorry, we're going on a mild tangent here.
The whole episode is going to be a massive tangent, Chris.
Yeah, but stick with us. I wouldn't class someone like Sissy Spacek as a Scream Queen.
No.
But others would, because one of her most famous roles is Carrie.
Yeah.
A really big, famous, culturally impactful role in a horror film.
And the same goes for Piper Laurie. Whereas PJ Souls, who's also in the same film, I would class as a Scream Queen.
Exactly. Because PJ Souls has starred in many horror films.
Yeah.
But
back to the 60s, we will get onto the 70s shortly, and touching again on Barbara Steele. In a way, I think she's one of the most influential horror actresses of that time, because, I mean, not only just for the horror genre, but for female actresses in general, she's someone who did exactly what she wanted to do, made it clear she was going to do what she wanted to do, and did it. And fair play to her. You can't really fault that.
No. And her look and her style, I think, would been massively influential.
Well, you're saying she's gorgeous now, but she's also terrifying in these films.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
Like, Black Sunday was really scary.
Oh my god, yeah. And it's that ability to be the antagonist, to be the horror, and the horror of the film.
Yeah.
You know, the centre of the horror,
Mhm.
and not just someone who's been victimised
Yeah.
by the horror, is so refreshing. Because you have someone like Barbara in
Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead, who's a massive wet blanket, who's annoying.
She takes victim to another level, at a more annoying level. In the same way Veronica Cartwright will in Alien, years later. I mean, at the end of the day, you can use a female as a victim in a film, but you've got to at least make them likeable. Or else there's no point them being a victim, because you don't want them to survive. I mean, Barbara is just, out of the whole Living Dead series, I mean, I can't really comment on the later ones. I'm sure there probably are a lot more annoying characters than that, but out of the first three, Night, Dawn and Day, she's like one of the most annoying female characters out of all those films.
Oh, she's genuinely quite annoying. And then you have someone like Janet Leigh at the beginning of that decade.
Yeah, who is very likeable and still a victim.
Yeah, probably the most famous murder victim in cinema history.
Yeah.
That scene has resonated throughout culture ever since. And, having someone like Barbara Steele be the murderer, be the witch, be the monster, it's great. And that's not to take away from Janet Leigh, but it was great. And to watch a film like Black Sunday and to see her revel in it is really quite enjoyable.
Yeah, and whilst we're on the subject of Janet Leigh, do you feel you've said everything you can say about the 60s now?
Yeah, I think so.
I think the 60s is a bit of a minor decade when it comes to horror.
It's also probably, and let's be honest here, we're probably a little less well versed in the 60s horror scene, if there was a particular scene.
A lot of it
then
was...
with over decades.
Was it Hammer horror, or was that 70s, would you say?
Hammer horror was 60s going into 70s, so you had a lot of women with very low-cut tops.
Yeah, and like...
in Hammer films.
Sexual vampires.
Yeah, just Victorians, but with their boobs hanging out.
Which wouldn't fall into Scream Queen's category.
Well, they would. I mean, you have someone like Hazel Court, who would have... Ingrid Pitt.
Yeah.
You would call them a Scream Queen, and also, from the influence maybe of Barbara Steele, they became antagonists, but it was usually because Christopher Lee had given them a good bite beforehand. Whereas in Black Sunday, the character that Barbara Steele plays is a witch from the start.
Yeah.
And not because some,
well,
vampire bitter.
Next up, we have the 70s, and the daughter of Janet Leigh is our main focus for this one.
Yeah, I think she's obviously Jamie Lee Curtis is who we're talking about. I think Jamie Lee Curtis is the epitome of a Scream Queen.
She is, and it's interesting because she's obviously the most... I mean, she's one of my favourite actresses, and she's most well known for being the Scream Queen. You ask anyone to name you a Scream Queen, they'll probably say Jamie Lee Curtis straight away. And it's interesting because you go from these victims in the 60s, and obviously Barbara Steele playing a villain in most of her roles, to coming into the 70s where you've got the victims again, but the victims are slightly stronger this time around, and Jamie Lee Curtis is the face of that. But she wasn't the first, interestingly enough, because you have the likes of Marilyn Burns in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She is a victim very much, but she still managed to get away and outsmart, Leatherface and his family.
Oh yeah, massively resourceful.
Look at Black Christmas.
Yeah, Black Christmas, Olivia Hussey.
I'm sure you'd like to touch on that a little more, being one of your favourite films.
Yeah, love Black Christmas, and a character. Forgive me, I can't remember her name. The character that Olivia Hussey plays is a much more well-rounded character than some girlfriend that gets stalked by a big shadow in the night. You know, she's resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
She's more real. You know, she's pregnant throughout the film. She, you know, can't decide whether she wants to keep it or not, which is a bit more reality and a bit more character development than maybe you had before for a potential victim. And Black Christmas is the precursor to, I believe, Black Christmas is really the precursor to the slasher film.
Yeah.
And that's not including the influence of the giallo films from Italy, but in terms of, you know, North American cinema, I think Black Christmas is where it really started.
Yeah, and I think the realism from Olivia Hussey's character in Black Christmas, and the realism with Marilyn Burns in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is what leads on to Jamie Lee Curtis and why she's so likable and so relatable, because she also has that realism there. She is the, you know, the shy girl next door that really, I mean, it's like an orgy of evidence that she just wants to study for school and she doesn't really want to go out and party, and she wouldn't have got that date with Ben Tramer planned if it weren't for one of the other girls setting it up for her. So she's very quiet and reserved and, you know, easy to relate to, and that's why when shit goes down, when Michael Myers comes for her, you know, it makes her more likable. You actually care about her more because this is that character that you can relate to on screen. And Jamie Lee Curtis is phenomenal in the role, and, you know, I think the reason why she's so associated with being the Scream Queen is her scream is just fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's a big part of being a Scream Queen.
And that's probably why she stands out compared to all the ones that came before her as well.
We saw a clip from A to Z of Horror with Christopher Lee, and he was obsessed with the fact that a good Scream Queen should have a really good scream.
Yeah.
And Jamie Lee Curtis is up there with the best.
Yeah.
And as an actress, being a Scream Queen, Jamie Lee Curtis, like Barbara Steele before her, fully immersed herself in the horror genre.
Yeah.
So Halloween was her first film, first starring role. Halloween was a massive success. Maybe there was a little typecasting here.
There was definitely typecasting.
But she, you know, has fun with the genre, goes on to star in The Fog.
Yeah.
Which is a completely different character to the one, to Laurie Strode. And then she stars in more sort of slasher films. Excuse me. Like Terror Train and Prom Night. And then she's in a Road Games.
Yeah, and
even I haven't seen, actually.
And then even Halloween 2.
Halloween 2.
You know, and it's like I was saying to Chris prior to recording this, the character of Laurie Strode, we see her, you know, through different incarnations. You have the two storylines you could go with. You've got the storyline that goes from the Halloween 2, where you got H2O and Resurrection, and then you've got the latest storyline from last year, where it just follows straight on from the first film. But both of these things have something in common. Jamie Lee Curtis is a strong character in each of these films. No matter how much of a victim she is always a strong character, which, again, it, you know, for me, when someone says Scream Queen, I think of a victim. But then it's things like that kind of change the definition up a bit and, you know, allow a wider range of what this can be.
Yeah. So I think what makes Jamie Lee Curtis a, you know, fantastic Scream Queen is that she starred in a lot of horror films.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the character of Laurie Strode is well renowned throughout, you know, cinema, and particularly with horror film fans. And she plays really kick-ass women in these films as well. And there are other actresses who are scream queens who always die in films. They always end up dying in films. Whereas Jamie Lee Curtis, now correct me if I'm wrong, didn't actually die in any horror film until Halloween Resurrection.
I haven't seen Terror Train, Prom Night and Road Games.
She's the final girl.
Yeah.
She's the final girl in those films. So she is the resourceful one that ends up surviving.
Which is also like, I mean, now this is someone who hasn't been in as many horror films as Jamie Lee Curtis, but also made a massive impact in the one she was in. It's like Jessica Harper in Suspiria. Again, I would class her as a scream queen, but again, she has that 70s vibe about her where she is resourceful as well as a victim.
Yeah.
You know, she is put in danger, but she knows her way around it. Well, she tries to find her way around it and obviously succeeds, but my point is, she is still a smart character.
Yeah, and a strong-willed character as well.
Which is we'll come back to when we get to the 80s, because that takes a slight dip.
I probably wouldn't class Jessica Harper as a scream queen. As sort of horror film fans, we know her most for Suspiria.
Yeah.
To a general audience, she might probably be more famous for her Woody Allen films.
Maybe.
You know, and that's going back to Sissy Spacek, who, yes, is probably most famous for Carrie, but she's a multi-Oscar nominated actress. She won an Oscar for Coal Miner's Daughter. She's had a very long and varied career outside of the genre.
But you do have Phantom of the Paradise with Jessica Harper as well.
Yeah. Do they class that as horror? I suppose they would. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. It's basically a version of Phantom of the Opera.
But then,
it would be horror.
Yeah. I mean, one really interesting one. I mean, Jessica Harper is hit or miss. You know, I'm sure many horror fans out there have had that debate before. But one definite scream queen who is very well known for one film is, of course, Linda Blair.
Yes.
She's definitely a scream queen.
Yes.
And she kind of started the whole... Well, actually, either her or another scream queen in the 70s started the whole child side to things. I mean, the other person I'm on about is Veronica Cartwright for The Birds.
Mm-hmm.
So, who would you class as the first young scream queen?
Well, I wouldn't really class Veronica Cartwright because she's not really the centre of that film, of The Birds. Whereas...
But she's also not the centre of Alien, but she's still a scream queen for that.
Yeah, I would probably class Linda Blair as the first sort of child scream queen, because she did The Exorcist, and then she did The Exorcist 2.
Yeah.
And then we've seen her grow up on screen in horror cinema. So she was in Hell Night. And that's that random...
Summer of Fear.
That random film that you purchased that we've yet to watch with David Hasselhoff that we are dying to watch. What is it called? Like Ghost House?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. I know which one you mean.
Yeah.
She was also in Supernatural, the TV show.
Yeah.
For one episode. So she's obviously, within the horror industry, she is, famous for her role in The Exorcist, but she has gone to get all these roles after. But she's definitely a scream queen from that one role. 100%.
Yeah. Because that was so culturally impactful.
Yeah.
And her within that film was so culturally impactful. And she never really outgrew that role.
No.
So, I don't know, that's not a disservice to Linda Blair. I think she's great. And I've enjoyed her in many, many films. For right or wrong. She's definitely a
Savage
B
Streets.
movie queen. I love Savage Streets. Absolutely love Savage Streets. And I loved Chained Heat as well. So, yeah, I love them. But she's absolutely the B movie queen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And a scream queen to boot. So, yeah, Linda Blair, you're a legend.
Before we move on from 70s, would you like to say a bit about Daria Nicolodi?
Yeah, so Daria Nicolodi, I would absolutely class as
100%
a
scream queen.
100%.
Yeah.
And through her association with her husband, Dario Argento, she starred in many of his films. Deep Red, Tenebrae, going into the 80s, Opera. So throughout her career, she's been directly linked to the horror genre. What's really kick-ass is that she's also had a few writing credits, particularly for Suspiria.
Yeah.
As well. And she was in Mario Bava's Shock. Or known as, I think it's Secret Beyond the Door 2 or something, like one of those films that has many names. So she's definitely found her place within the horror genre. And I think she's, to me, the Italian scream queen.
Yeah, she is.
I know
the
Barbara
Italian,
Steele was
yeah.
a British actress who went to work in Italy. Daria Nicolodi, and I really hope I'm pronouncing her surname correctly, is somebody who's fully immersed
Yeah.
within the Italian horror, cinema, and so absolutely an Italian scream queen.
Yeah. And moving on from that, we get into the 80s where sex appeal is introduced to screen queens, I'd say, which brings us to our focus for the 80s, and that is the incredible, for good or bad reasons, Linnea Quigley.
Yeah, so it's what comes to mind is that quote from Scream, where Randy says that Jamie Lee doesn't show her tits until she goes legit.
Yeah.
Speaking of when she started to do more mainstream cinema with Trading Places, and she shows her boobs in that one, which she never did in any of the horror films she starred in.
And she always survived.
And she survived. Now, Linnea Quigley is the opposite of that. And I don't actually think I've seen a film with her in where I haven't seen her breasts.
No. And everything else to go with it.
And then, a lot of the time, genuinely everything else to go with it.
And I think our main focus for Linnea Quigley is Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, she is butt naked through the majority of her screen time in that film. And do you know what? I think she's... I was going to say fantastic actress then. No discredit to her.
Hey, hang on. No. That is a fantastic performance.
It is.
It is.
She does what she needs to do, and she does it right, and she has fun with it, and we have fun watching it. Is she going to win an Oscar? No. Never.
I say just give her an Oscar.
But she... And I think really her as a scream queen and... really represents where horror went in the 80s.
Oh, hell yeah.
Anyway.
And this is why we chose her. She is a perfect representation of screen queens in the 80s.
Definitely. These films were bloodier.
Yeah.
These films were full of sex, full of nudity, always were a bit tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
Weren't particularly scary, you know. I wouldn't say I've seen Linnea Quigley in a scary film.
No, not that I can think of.
No, and I think she really represents where horror was in the 1980s. And every interview I've ever seen of her, she's come across as just a real fun character.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, I'd only recently watched Return of the Living Dead, and everything I'd seen with her in it before that, including that film where we saw the sound guy at the corner of the screen, what was that called?
Murder Weapon.
That was horrendous. But, she's always got that camp, cheesy vibe about her, but then in Return of the Living Dead, it's like she was actually trying, and I love her in that film. It's a great performance, and a strangely likeable character, even though she's not really meant to be. I just want to see more and more of her.
Yeah, and
Which, I mean, we do see more and more of her in a different way.
But then even in a smaller role in something like Silent Night, Deadly Night...
Yeah.
She's, again, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but she is an actress who has fully immersed herself in the horror genre.
Yeah.
And she'll take any sort of role and, make it fun.
Yeah,
make
absolutely.
It fun to watch.
And even Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, I mean, that, if you need a film to represent where 80s cinema went, that's Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which is kind of a satire of...
massively. It's hugely tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, because it knows it's a comedy, but it kind of spoofs the whole of 80s cinema. It picks out all those points that we've just raised and uses them to its advantage, and Linnea Quigley just looks like she's having the time of her life in that role.
Fantastic scream queen.
We get a bit of diversity, though, in the 80s, and we even get 2 male scream queens, one of which has a little more to say, we have a little more to say about than the other, but we'll start with Bruce Campbell, because the internet classes him as a male scream queen.
Yeah, or a scream king.
Yeah.
So they say that he is the scream king.
Which we can't do a full episode on, so we might as well touch on that. There is not enough Scream Kings to do a full episode.
It's a weird one because someone like Vincent Price made his career from horror films, but I would never call him a Scream King.
Yeah.
I suppose, in terms of the Evil Dead, Ash is your final girl.
Yes.
Or your final guy.
He is. He does a lot of screaming as well.
Yeah, and you don't get much of that in horror cinema.
No, and I mean, you look at 2013 when Jane Levy took over the role. Well, not took over the role, but her character Mia was essentially in Ash's place, and the role translated so well over to a female. So I think that that says a lot about that role in particular of Ash, and Bruce Campbell in many ways did what these Scream Queens did, and he went on to star in many other horror films as well, and became this big B-movie actor.
Yeah. Again, really paved paved his own way within the horror genre.
And the more interesting one, not to say Bruce Campbell's an interesting, I love Bruce Campbell, but the bigger subject to talk about is Mark Patton.
Yeah. So if anyone's not really recognising the name, Mark Patton played Jesse in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Yes.
And he's not actually... Well, I suppose he's not the final girl.
I'll happily call him a Scream Queen.
Scream Queen.
He has a documentary about himself called Scream Queen.
Yeah, and I think he would like to refer to himself as the first male Scream Queen. We haven't seen the documentary yet.
No,
but
we really want to.
Yeah. I don't think he really had any career after the film.
He was in a film with Cher.
That was before. Was
it before?
He was Come Back to Five and Dime.
Jimmy
Dean, the Robert Altman film.
Yeah.
That was before, if I remember correctly.
I don't know. I swear I read something the other day that said
Well,
Go on, get your phone out. Come on.
No. I do you know what? I'll go out on a limb on this, and if anyone wants to correct me,
he liked one of our posts. He might listen to this. Do you sure you don't want to?
It was Come Back to Five and Dime. Jimmy Dean, and I believe it was released in '82. Okay. Whereas, I'm a big Robert Altman fan.
I'll trust your judgment. The phone's coming out. He's double checking.
Don't tell him I'm on my phone. That's not how this is meant to work. Come on, no dead air.
It's suspense.
This is like a really long title as well. Here we go. Robert Altman film, 1982.
Okay, you were right. But anyway, back onto the subject of Mark Patton as Jesse in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's, for me, I find that film, because, I mean, the brief history of the story, off the top of my head, might get this wrong, hopefully not, but off the top of my head, the brief history is, there is obviously gay subtext in this film. You know, you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. So, you know, it's things like the fact that there's a whole scene in a gay bar where producer Bob Shea plays a barman in full S&M gear, but claimed he had no idea about the gay subtext.
Okay, so this is a massively gay film, and it hugely, and then the screenwriters pretty much admitted that, you know, this film was about Jesse probably coming out.
Yeah. But when it was first released, they denied that.
They denied it. They denied it because it would have killed the film.
Oh, absolutely. And Mark Patton got all the backlash for it.
He did. And Mark Patton is an a gay actor now.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have been at the time. Because
no, I think he was.
Or did he come out afterwards?
I think he was an out gay actor, and that's why he got the backlash.
Yeah.
For why the film, you know, everyone was like,
because it was career suicide. It was career suicide. See, he probably, and we haven't seen the documentary, we can't wait to watch it.
Yeah.
But my assumption is that, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street was a massively successful film. Mm-hmm. You've just been given the starring role in the sequel, which potentially could be even bigger box office wise, and I believe it was bigger box office wise, and you think this is really it, this is your career starting, you know, you're going to be a famous face, and there's a massive backlash against the film because of the gay context, and because, you know, you're the lead in that film, then you get all the backlash against you in particular, and it kills your career dead. Yeah,
and the thing is, and now the film has been embraced as an LGBT horror film. I think the fact it's got its own male scream queen is just so empowering, and I love it. I really do. I love the fact that he can be classed as a scream queen, and I'm just sad that it didn't carry on to, you know, become a bit of a trend.
Gay horror sequels?
Well, no, not gay horror sequels, but, I mean, male scream queens that are openly gay and can be classed as a scream queen.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose so.
I mean, it's not something that's completely dead. I mean, I'm sure there'll be others, you know, in years to come with, you know, the film industry being a bit more diverse now, but yeah, I just think that role in particular stands out, and it's why I had to mention it in this episode. I think it stands out, and, you know, his role as Jesse stands out because it is something a little different compared to everything else we're talking about.
Yeah, do you know what? Potentially we could cover it in an episode.
Yeah.
After we've watched the documentary, because do not get us wrong. We're not saying that Freddy's Revenge is a masterpiece in any way. But it's an interesting film.
It's a thoroughly enjoyable film. I really enjoy it.
Oh, it's a fun film, but it's nowhere near as good as the original.
Which brings us to another scream queen, Heather Langenkamp.
Ah, yes. So, speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street, and you'll probably get...
Which leads us to another queen, Lisa Wilcox. Like, we could go on for ages with Nightmare on Elm Street.
So you really could, and that's the thing with these franchise films. If you star in one or more, I suppose you know you could be seen as a scream queen.
Yeah, but Heather Langenkamp has starred in other minor, horror films outside of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. But within that franchise alone, she is definitely a scream queen for me. And again, another one who is smart, and she stands aside from the other 80s scream queens in the way that, she wasn't exactly the sexy gets her boobs out scream queen that everyone else was. But she was still that strong character that you still want to root for. And, I think she does the job great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we would class her as a scream queen because that is her most famous role.
Yeah.
I think I'm starting to develop my own opinion. Talking about this, I think I'm starting to develop my own sort of idea of what a scream queen is.
Yeah.
Is somebody who is, horror genre, legend.
Yeah, like really?
Adrienne Barbeau.
From The Fog. I mean, just
other people, other people may know them for something else. I mean, someone like Jamie Lee Curtis, it's undeniable. But
Heather Langenkamp is undeniable. Everyone would know her from another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she was in a TV series, but she really hasn't had any really more notable roles than Nancy Thompson.
No.
Mark Patton, his role as Jesse is Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Lisa Wilcox, Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5.
Yeah.
But then you get someone like Patricia Arquette in part 3. She goes on to bigger, not to be rude, but she goes on to bigger projects and more notable projects outside of the horror genre.
Unlike Ashley Lawrence, who is
Lawrence.
Definitely a scream queen.
Yeah. I think I've sort of developed my opinion of what scream queen is now, because I was a little on the fence.
So, how's your opinion on Shelley Duvall now then, being a scream queen?
Shelley Duvall is not a scream queen,
but she is in The Shining.
She's in The Shining, and she's probably. See, this is my problem. My love for Shelley Duvall.
But is this also going against what you were thinking a second ago about what a scream queen is?
Well, maybe my love for Shelley Duvall sort of skews my opinion of her as a scream queen, because I love her in The Shining, obviously, and I do understand that to the general public, her role in The Shining is potentially her only role that they know. That or Olive Oil in Popeye. But to me, I love her in
everything.
And everything. 3 women. Well, Robert Altman, and as I've stated, I'm a huge Robert Altman fan. So I loved her in Nashville. I loved her in 3 Women. I loved her in Brewster McCloud. Loved her in Popeye. She's probably one of my favourite actresses.
Well,
sorry, we've gone on to my love for Shelley Duvall. I'm not even
this
talking
is the
about
Shelley Duvall podcast. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall.
This has devolved into a.
Are we ever here on the podcast with us? Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Oh, hi, Shelley. She's not actually here. I know that impression was convincing, but
she's had a few issues recently, so
been invited on this podcast. I hope Shelley Duvall never does listen to this podcast. I'm so pissed off.
If you ever do, I love you.
Now, an interesting one that we could tell a story about from in-person experience is Barbara Crampton.
Barbara Crampton.
Ask anybody, they'll say Barbara Crampton's a scream queen. Ask Barbara Crampton, she would not say the same thing. Do you remember the Q&A she did shortly after we met her?
Remind me of the specifics.
Yeah, so we met Barbara Crampton at Fright Fest last year, and she was there promoting the latest Puppet Master film, and which was great, by the way. and she did a Q&A, and she mentioned that she did an article in a magazine. I can't remember what it may have been Fangoria, where she called that article "Don't Call Me a Scream Queen," because she believes that because she is an actress that screams in a film doesn't really make her a scream queen.
Yeah, and I think I maybe understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
The idea of a scream queen is potentially a little condescending.
Yeah.
You know, she sees herself, rightfully so, as an actress playing a part and, you know, playing a character and trying to get into the, you know, into the character's mind, and all anyone cares about is how loud she can scream or how frightened she can look.
Or how little clothes she wears.
Or how little... She's... admittedly, love you, Barbara, but she is one that does get the bits out quite often, don't she?
Yeah. But you go, girl. You know, you live in that 80s dream.
Oh my god, she's gorgeous. You know, if you've got it, absolutely flaunt it.
But I mean, I'd class her as one of my favourite scream queens, which is, you know, kind of threw me off when she said about not being called one. It's like, oh, okay. Still one of my favourite scream queens, but that's an interesting take on it.
I was going to say, apologies to her, but I class her as a scream queen.
Yeah.
Because she does die in a lot of these films as well.
Uh-huh. But another unconventional... Well, I mean, obviously Barbara's not unconventional. To herself she is, but, you know, to everyone else she isn't. But one that's unconventional for me, but I wanted to bring up, is actually Linda Hamilton. Now, I don't know if I'd necessarily call her a straight-up scream queen, but I think the potential is there, considering myself, I class the first Terminator film as a horror film. And she also did Children of the Corn. And in both of those films, she plays a very scream queen-like character. But I think her roles elsewhere, outside of those films, kind of defeats it a bit. What's your opinion on that one?
I don't think she's a scream queen, if I'm being honest. I don't think she's well known enough as a horror film actress.
Yeah.
The Terminator, yes. And, you know, you could see it as a horror film. But she's probably more famous for Terminator 2,
True.
which I wouldn't class.
This is not a horror film. No,
film.
not even close.
So I probably wouldn't say she's more of an action heroine, I'd say.
Yeah. But now she is. But I mean, if this was in the 80s and you'd just seen her in Terminator, you'd seen her in Children of the Corn. From that up until that point, she could have been going down that path. But then I do think, with the way her career went in the 90s, with Children of the Corn was the 80s, wasn't it?
I think so.
People are gonna think I'm so fucking dumb if it's not. But anyway, with Terminator 2, I think that did change that course. But yeah, I mean, she had the potential there. But finishing off in the 80s, one last person that I do want to mention is Danielle Harris, because this is an interesting one. Again, like Linda Blair, she is a child scream queen in the 80s. And she is fantastic in Halloween 4 and 5. She's probably one of the best things about those films. You know, she plays a fantastic role, thoroughly likeable, very memorable scream. She was a scream queen. And she was, like, how old? Like, really, really young.
Yeah, I'd say, like, 10.
Yeah, like, ridiculously young for a scream queen. But again, you know, same as Linda Blair. But then, you know, much like Linda Blair, she didn't stop there. She went on to, in fact, star in Rob Zombie's interesting, shall we say, Halloween remakes in the role of Annie. And she went on to star in the Hatchet franchise. And, you know, she is great. I mean, even as a modern-day scream queen, she's fantastic. So, could not leave the 80s without mentioning her. I'm sure we'll probably come back to her again in a bit when we get to modern day. Moving on to the 90s, there's not as much to talk about.
Well, horror cinema in general took a bit of a slump in the 90s.
Yeah.
You had standouts, like Candyman.
Well, our subject is Sarah Michelle Gellar. Would you like to touch on that a bit?
Yeah. So as I was saying, during the 90s there was a bit of a slump in horror cinema. You had your random standouts, but I think people sort of realised that the horror genre was dying, and then Scream came out.
Yeah.
And, it's a subject that's been covered many, many times, but the idea is that Scream saved the horror film.
Yeah.
And this cool, film, very
with two Scream Queens in it.
Yeah, very slick, very young cast, sort of reinvigorated a genre.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. I would say it did.
It did. Yeah.
And from the back of that, you got a lot of very slick, cool horror films.
Mm-hmm.
Very knowing, very tongue-in-cheek, not particularly scary.
Meta is the word.
Meta is the word that I'm looking for. Thank you very much, Gary.
Which is interesting, because that kind of started with New Nightmare.
Yeah, but I don't think New Nightmare was successful enough to have had
but obviously,
impact.
Same director, Wes Craven, who
Yeah.
comes back 2 years later with Scream and takes the world by storm.
Yeah, and New Nightmare was a fantastic film, but I don't think we could really give it credit, because I don't think it was a successful film.
Unfortunately.
But then Scream was their massive box office success.
Yeah.
Winning MTV Movie Awards. All that business.
And the Scream Queen killed off within the first 10 minutes, much like Janet Leigh.
Yeah, Drew Barrymore, who had been a child actress and starred in a couple of Stephen King adaptations. But from the back of that, you have I Know What You Did Last Summer, another sleek, horror film, and starring in that was Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah Michelle Gellar, who's very much a product of the 90s, I'd say. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a horror TV series.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think with Sarah Michelle Gellar, there's a lot of versatility there in her acting, because you've got her roles in I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream 2, and even the Grudge remake. And
have you seen that?
I have, yeah, and I
I
actually enjoy it. It's not as good as the original, but Sarah Michelle Gellar is fantastic in it. She is more of the face of, in that film in particular, of the more smart Scream Queen, who, she's more into investigating, which is a lot of the 90s, which is absolutely right what you said about being a product of the 90s, because that sort of characteristics is what you got from all the Scream Queens in the 90s, even though there wasn't many of them. They're all kind of like investigators. I mean, you look at Virginia Madsen in Candyman.
Mm-hmm.
She was investigating for an entire film. I wouldn't call Jodie Foster a Scream Queen, but if you're looking at female representation in horror films in the 90s, she's investigating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't remember a lot about Sarah Michelle Gellar's role in I Know What You Did Last Summer, do you?
Yeah, so she plays...
I know she plays the pretty girl, because she obviously has the whole Miss thing that they spoofed in Scary Movie.
Yeah, so she's a pageant queen.
Yeah, there we go, that's what I'm looking for.
She's a pageant queen.
Yes!
Helen Shivers. And she's not... Jennifer Love Hewitt is the main role in the film. And what I remember from Helen Shivers is her death scene. Do you remember that?
I don't. It's been a long time.
So she's been chased all around town. She's managed to get away from
it's at the furniture store.
Furniture store.
I do remember.
Her horrible sister's died. She's been killed, and Helen makes her way to this alleyway. And she's really close to there's a fucking parade going on with fireworks. And she's so close, and she stops and looks back. Do you remember this?
I do, and now you're making me think of something else to point out. Something that was actually funny enough, mentioned a lot in Scary Movie, is the whole Scream Queens making dumb decisions.
Yeah.
Which contradicts the whole Scream Queens doing the investigating and being smart thing, which I just mentioned. But it is something that came about. The whole, falling down when they're running away thing and going in the wrong direction when they know it's probably not the right place they should go. And this death scene, is a good example.
Yeah. And I think Sarah Michelle getting not particularly her roles, but her as an actress, she was really cool.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely no disrespect to Jamie Lee Curtis, but I don't think she was seen as particularly cool.
Yeah.
The character that she played wasn't cool. Laurie Strode in Halloween, someone like Linnea Quigley was, overly sexualized.
Yeah.
Now, I thought she was pretty cool in Return of the Living Dead, but her main role in the films that she starred in was to get her, boobs and tuppence out.
Yeah.
Whereas Sarah Michelle Gellar, everybody wanted to be Sarah Michelle Gellar. She was so beautiful.
Well, she slayed.
And so...
Literally.
Yeah, and so cool, and so funny. And I think that's a different dimension to a Scream Queen.
Yeah.
Is that girls wanted to be her.
Yeah. And then, I wanted to be her. And then you have Neve Campbell, on the other hand.
Yeah, Neve Campbell.
Who is the complete opposite of Sarah Michelle Gellar. And falls into... I'd say so. Would you have classed her as cool?
Yeah, I think
I
so.
put her in the same Jamie Lee category.
I suppose in The Craft, yeah.
Even in Scream. There's the whole thing, the fact that she has sex and she survives, but that is purposely in that film for a bit of humour towards the tropes of a horror film. But until that point, she's still that girl that's not really, she's not like Sarah Michelle Gellar. I don't know,
I think I understand what you're getting at. I think you're looking at the character of Sidney Prescott.
Yeah.
Rather than Neve Campbell herself.
Neve Campbell herself, yeah, I'd say she is cool. Even after her little transformation in The Craft, she's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I see what you mean.
I think you're looking
I went a bit...
Whereas...
I was looking at Sidney Prescott, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I got sidetracked.
Yeah.
I messed it all up. That's it, guys. End of episode. I fucked up.
Calm down.
But, yeah. No, I'd say Neve Campbell's cool. I was wrong.
But that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Is that you had a lot of very hip, young actresses starring in numerous horror films.
It's also, I found that the craze of older actresses and actors playing younger characters was in the 90s as well.
Oh, that's throughout cinema history.
Yeah, but I found it really notable in the 90s. I think it was the hairstyles that did it.
Well, I think it was because the post-Scream horror films wanted to be... I keep using the word hip. I don't think it's hip. Just keep saying hip so much.
No, you're making yourself sound older than you are.
Or cool. I'm not even sure if people say cool anymore. But the whole idea is that to get a young, hip cast who could work enough hours to get the film finished.
Yeah. And
they had to go. But that's throughout cinema history.
Yeah. And then this carried on... that's not our main subject for this podcast, but there's sort of the type of screen queens in the 90s, even though there wasn't many of them, it did carry on to the early 2000s, to the point that if you were to watch a few films from the early 2000s and the 90s, you probably wouldn't know the difference. But then we get a little later into it, and then this is your, remakes and sequels galore stage side of things. So
yeah, so after your sleek, hip 90s...
Will you stop saying hip? Fucking hell.
I'm obsessed. But after that, you get where I switch off, and it's only now that I'm catching up, is the ridiculous amounts of remakes. And I know everyone's going to think I'm a prize prick for saying this. Oh, if you haven't watched them, then you don't understand modern horror. But this is where modern horror really took a terrible turn for me, because it was all shite.
Okay, sit back, hon. I've got this.
Okay, thank you.
So our main subject for the 2000s is Mary Elizabeth Winstead, or as I like to know her, Mary Elizabeth Slaystead. I love her, and honestly, I will defend Chris to a certain point. The 2000s is extremely hit or miss. And I found this out because I remember films very wrong. Like last night, for this podcast, to get Chris up to date with a Mary Elizabeth Slaystead, we watched Final Destination 3, and it wasn't quite the film I remembered.
Dog shit.
But the thing is, with the 2000s, you had this weird mix of action films that mixed with horror, and this gave people a weird perception of what a scream queen is. Kate Beckinsale, for example, won an award for, was it Scream Queen of the Decade?
No, I think it was just Scream Queen of the Year.
Of the year, yeah.
Something like that.
This is someone who was very well known for a role in Underworld, in which she plays an action hero, essentially. But it is a horror film, it's to do with vampires and werewolves. So I would never once have thought of Kate Beckinsale as a scream queen. Maybe for something like Vacancy, which I love, absolutely for that film. But for Underworld, no. And the same goes for Mila Jovovich. Am I saying her name right? Mila Jovovich. I think that's right. Resident Evil. And you put her name into Google, and you put in, is she a scream queen? You'll get the answer yes. I don't get that myself. So this is where it took a bit of a weird turn. Now, for me, who I'd class as a scream queen in the 2000s, is Melissa George, who was in the Amityville Horror remake, and she was in 30 Days of Night. And I would class Naomi Watts as a scream queen, who was in Funny Games remake and the Ring remake and the Ring sequel. And can you see the pattern? This is all it is. It's a lot of remakes, a lot of sequels, which is, these characters are based on other characters. These are other roles that they're taking these from. So it's a weird one, the 2000s, it really is. And Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Final Destination 3 sequel. She's in the Black Christmas remake, which is also dog shit. But she's the best thing about everything she's in. She would later go on to be in the Thing prequel. And what I like about her is she's got that mix of, she's got a great scream. She always plays a strong character. She's also got the ability to be a victim as well. She's got it all nailed. And yeah, I really like her. I think she's great.
Yeah, and I didn't think the Thing prequel was a bad film.
No.
But Black Christmas and Final Destination... Final Destination 3 were absolute dog shite. But she was admittedly the best thing in those films.
Now, whilst we're on stuff that you dislike, I'm going to move on to the subject of Katie Featherston, who is in Paranormal Activity. And I think, again, I would class her as a scream queen because she wasn't of a minor horror stuff around this time as well. So she had that sort of thing where she was known for one horror film, but then she went on to star in these little things that were lesser known. But again, you listen to her scream in that film, and you look at, you know, her characteristics in that film. She is a scream queen. I would say a modern scream queen. And she was, you know, in various entries in that franchise and became well known through that. And I just wanted to quickly get that in before Chris had anything to say about it. Shawnee Smith from the Saw sequel. I mean, well, she was in the first Saw, not as much, but then, you know, as she goes on, I think she becomes a scream queen within that franchise. But realistically, you look at those last two I mentioned, and this is really clutching at straws, because you, like the 90s, there's not a lot in the 2000s, and if they are coming off other bits of media. But whereas Shawnee Smith and Katie Featherston, obviously they're in franchises that they were the beginning of, so I think they deserve a mention. But Chris could come back now. Hi, you still here?
No, would you say that there's a lack of actresses in the 2000s that repeatedly go into the horror genre?
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely.
You have someone like Kate Beckinsale, who stars in The First Underworld.
Mm-hmm.
It's a success, so she stars in the sequels.
Yeah.
Mila Jovovich, she's in the first Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's a success, therefore you get sequels that she stars in.
Yeah.
But she doesn't necessarily have any other notable roles within the horror genre.
Absolutely. I can't think of another Shawnee Smith film other than Saw.
Exactly. So, and then that's seen in other screen queens, such as Ashley Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
But then you quintessential scream queens are in the horror genre in repeated but separate films.
Yeah.
Would you say there's a lack of that?
Absolutely.
That any sort of new horror film.
Absolutely, which brings me to one other actress I want to mention that actually goes into the 2010s. Is that the right term for it?
Yeah, 2010s.
Is Chloe Grace Moretz, because she started off in the Amityville Horror remake with Melissa George. She is a child actor in that film, very, very much a scream queen, and then goes on to just take a lot of horror roles, and even more risque roles. Like, you know, I mean, we've seen Kick-Ass recently. That wasn't long after Amityville Horror, when she was still a child, and, you know, she's going around saying cunt and stuff like that and killing people. But then, you know, she'd go into other horror films like Let Me In, the remake of Let the Right One In, the remake of Carrie, the remake of Suspiria. Again, are you seeing a pattern with Chloe Moretz? So I don't think she's actually been in a horror film that's not a remake, if I'm honest, but she's still taking horror roles. Now, you get onto the 2010s, and that's still starting in the early 2010s. You know, you have Mary Elizabeth Winstead in the Thing prequel, which kind of, I think it was shortly before Jane Levy did, you know, Mia in the Evil Dead reboot. And you had that sort of females taking males' places in those films. And I think that was a sign of the times that I've got here. Screen queens are just now more strong and empowering in modern day films.
Yeah,
and again, Jamie Lee Curtis, she's did the whole transition, because you have her Laurie Strode in 1978, and you look at her Laurie Strode in last year's sequel. It's everything that screen queens have come to be modern day cinema.
Yeah, I think I've sort of jumped back on the horror genre bandwagon by now, coming into the 2010s, and you're getting more well-rounded female horror film characters.
Yeah.
And the actress that we chose is Vera Farmiga.
Uh-huh.
And she didn't do The Conjuring until she was 40 years old.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is quite old by Hollywood standards.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been Oscar nominated for Up in the Air with George Clooney. But this was really, for me at least, her breakout role.
Yeah.
You know, in The Conjuring, What character does she play?
She plays Lorraine Warren.
Lorraine Warren. Excuse me, I was forgetting the name there. Playing Lorraine Warren, and from there she's gone into
Bates Motel.
Motel.
I mean, the whole Conjuring universe, such as, Annabelle Comes Home, she was recently in that.
Even
Godzilla.
That.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters, she was recently in.
She was. So she's one that's come later into it.
Oh, she was in Orphan as well. She played the mother in Orphan. Have you seen that?
No.
No, but she was very good in that as well. But she's one of those that's not just stuck with a franchise. She's branched out, and she has starred in other horror films as well, and monster movies.
But
and
she's
such.
quite representative of where we are with women in horror films. She's a little older.
Mm-hmm.
She's a well-known actress.
Mm-hmm.
Really being able to bring a real great acting style to these films.
Yes.
Take for example Toni Collette, who massively deserved an Oscar nomination for Hereditary.
Yeah.
And
was also fantastic in Krampus.
Yeah. You're getting these real established actresses, and older actresses, in these horror films, and becoming scream queens maybe a little later into their career.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at someone like Lin Shaye.
I was just about to bring up Lin Shaye.
Lin Shaye. Who would have thought that Lin Shaye, who I believe is in her 70s
She's in
now?
her 70s.
Now, I know it was a sequel to an already established franchise, but, a wide release film, Insidious: The Last Key, where the main protagonist and the top billed cast member is a woman in her 70s.
And it got to that point because of the fan demand for her. Demand was there. From her character, we all know what happens to her in the first film. If you haven't seen it, don't listen to this. She gets killed. But her character was so popular in that film that they did everything they can to bring her back for everything else. To the point that they did, obviously, the sequel with her spirit. But then they had to do prequels because they needed to bring her back because that was where the demand was for this franchise.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible to think.
And she's fantastic in those films. She really is.
If you think only, 30 years ago, in the 80s, you would never have had a horror film with the audience that the horror films had and where horror film was. You would never have had someone the age of Lin Shaye heading up a film.
No.
She ain't going to get her tits and tuppence out, is she?
It's probably a good thing.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. And then this has gone into Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
Who has always revisited the character of Laurie Strode in the past.
But done it better than ever.
But done it, yeah.
And actually gave it a really serious side.
Oh my god, and fantastic character development.
Yeah.
A fantastic performance. And I think it's great. I think it's wonderful where we are at now.
Yeah.
Where horror films are bringing out the best in really great actresses.
Yeah.
Lupita Nyong'o in Us.
I was just going to say, the African American representation's getting better as well.
Finally, that do you know what? That is very true, actually. Because of all the women we've mentioned up until Lupita Nyong'o, who has the potential to become a scream queen.
Yeah.
With Us and Little Monsters. Mm-hmm. It is Little Monsters, isn't it?
She's
coming out soon. Yeah. It's actually the first a non-white actress that we've mentioned.
It's true. And even someone who we actually noticed through watching a few films was Betty Gabriel, who was one of the staff members that the rich white family employed in Get Out, which of course was an Oscar-winning film. Betty Gabriel, it really was a minor role in that film, but she was fucking incredible in that film.
She was really
so
good.
creepy.
She was really good in that film.
And then we saw her in Upgrade, which is a science fiction horror film. She was fantastic in that. Wasn't a major role, but she was still good in it. We saw her in The Purge election year, a bit of a bigger role in that. Really, really fucking good in that. And she was even the best part about Unfriended Dark Web. So she's just popped up in these films we've watched, and we just noticed that as a recurring thing. And I just want to see more of her. I think she's fantastic. She's so good.
Yeah.
She's a fantastic actress, and again, more African American representation, which is a sign of the times with the film industry in general. But it's great to see that, passing over into horror films as well.
It's about freaking time as well.
Yeah.
It's about freaking time. And like, how many decades have we been through?
Since the 60s.
Yeah.
And not one.
And not one. Isn't that ridiculous?
I'm looking at these notes now, and there's not one that we've noted down.
It's also ridiculous that we didn't notice until now. But yeah, how shocking.
But as you were saying about the older screen queens as well, it even goes into TV. Jessica Lange, American Horror Story,
oh my
Sarah
God,
Paulson.
Yes. Yeah. Emma Roberts.
Emma Roberts isn't old.
No, but in TV terms.
Yeah, no, I was going to get to that.
Screen queens
Whereas we
TV.
get to our younger screen queens, Emma Roberts is absolutely a screen queen. I love her so much. Samara Weaving is very promising as a screen queen. She was in Mayhem and more recently the fantastic Ready or Not. And when I was watching that, the whole way through, I think she is an absolute screen queen. She is the definition of screen queen and more of what is represented in modern day. Like, she screams a lot in that film, and it's a very memorable scream, and she's very strong, and she was also a victim, but she put it all into one, and it was a real audience character, and I think that's very important in a screen queen. They've got to be someone the audience can relate with. And would you agree about Samara Weaving?
Yeah, I think she has the potential to become a screen queen. See where her career goes.
Yeah, much like Jessica Roth, who's only been in the Happy Death Day films.
Yeah.
And that's hard to believe. When I was looking at her IMDb, I thought I was missing something, because in Happy Death Day, it's like she's been doing this for years. She is the perfect screen queen. So good in both those films.
The roles you're talking about are more comedic roles, though, really.
Yeah, but then you look back at the 80s.
Yeah.
So are they.
Yeah. So they're not straight up, horror films. And they're not straight up horror film roles. So they probably exercise their comedic chops rather than their dramatic scream queen.
But then you've got someone like Micah Monroe, who was in It Follows, and that wasn't comedic in the slightest.
No, but what has she done since?
Well, she was also in The Guest.
She was.
Shut up.
I didn't like The Guest.
I think she was in something else as well. But then, even Fiona Dourif, Brad Dourif's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Who was in Curse and Court of Chucky, and she was also in the Purge TV series. But a lot of people class her as a modern day screen queen. I don't know if I would at this stage. I think the potential is there.
But then, the Chucky films aren't straight again.
But her role was very serious in those films.
Yeah. The point I'm making really about modern horror is these real great actresses doing really dramatic things in horror films.
So it goes into three categories.
I'd like to see that's where the screen queen goes now, because you're getting very, very excellent horror films, very well made horror films, very well acted horror films.
Yeah.
And that is where I'd like to see the genre go, and the scream queen go. I want Lupita Nyong'o to be the next Jamie Lee Curtis. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah. So you got your three categories. You got your older scream queens. You've got your African American and more diverse scream queens, and then you've got your comedy ones. So, and I think those three categories, it's just getting better. You can't really complain at that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think horror cinema's at a bit of a high at the moment.
Yeah.
There's some really great films that have come out.
So, what is your conclusion?
Oh my god, my conclusion is that I don't friggin' have one.
About scream queens in general.
About scream queens in general. It's so difficult to really narrow it down to what makes a scream queen. You know, is it gorgeous beauty? Well, not necessarily. Is it, one major role in a horror film? Potentially, is it somebody who fully immerses themselves in the horror genre? Definitely. And it's in my head, and it may just be personal preference here. When I hear an actress's name and I don't automatically think of a horror film or their role in a horror film, I don't think I class them as a scream queen.
Yeah.
What do you think?
For me, I agree with that too. For me, it's got to be someone that, is capable of being put in danger. Someone that you relate to. Someone that you want to root for. Someone that you'll actually be bothered if they die in a film. But someone that can actually take care of themselves and fight their way through a film and become the popular force behind a franchise. I think that's what makes a scream queen for me.
Yeah, I think maybe you're looking at the character rather than the actress.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of them are returning characters. I mean, you think of the amount of actresses we spoke about that have returned for different films compared to the amount that I've just known for those characters within those specific franchises. And, going back to Jamie Lee Curtis, she was typecast, really, in a lot of the films after. So she would be, that character.
Yeah. I think typecasting has maybe been a big influence on the idea of a scream queen.
And if a scream queen
history.
if they can play multiple different characters, then even better. Like Barbara Steele, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's our Scream Queens episode.
Yeah, so that's what we think about Scream Queens. Obviously, opinions are like arseholes. Everyone's got one. You may think we're wrong. I don't know. I'm not even 100% sure myself of what makes a scream queen.
But we want to know what you think. So
but I think we've given it a bloody good go for Halloween.
So.
I think we've mentioned some absolute slay queens as actresses that we adore. If there's any that you've not heard of, and I'm not sure, there probably isn't, but go and check them out. Check out the films that we've mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And just let us know what you think, your theories on what a scream queen is.
Yeah.
Some of your favourite scream queens.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week. We haven't decided on a specific film yet, but we'll be back on Tuesday as normal. The Halloween Classics episodes are over now, so we'll try and pick something nice and trashy for you. This has been a while.
Yeah, and if anyone would like to recommend a film from the 2000s that I should watch, because I was deadly silent during that section, a good film, a good horror film from the 2000s that is neither a remake nor a sequel, then please let me know and we can watch. We won't do a podcast on it. I've seen that.
I'm saying it's not a remake or a sequel.
No, and that was alright. That was alright. So more of that, please. More of the sort of Hatchet style films, or just standout films that aren't connected to any other films from the 2000s, please. We wouldn't do a podcast on it, but just...
I don't know, we might do.
Potentially. No, because I'm asking for a good one. But yeah, please let me know and try and educate me.
Yes, so if
Another tangent.
If you want to give Chris those recommendations, you can find us on Horror Cult Trash over on Instagram and Facebook, Horror Cult Trash on Twitter. I'm Gazmo205 on Instagram, GazCruise92 on Twitter.
And I'm Chris Barker823 on Instagram and Twitter.
And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, rate, review and subscribe. Anything else, just give us a like and a follow. And that's it. We will see you on Tuesday.
See you on Tuesday.